America, the single opinion cult. Narrowing permitted ideas on both left and right, one unsuitable voice at a time. Not long ago, I was writing in defense of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. When she first entered Congress as an inner-city 20-something who'd knock off longtime insider Joe Crowley with a Sandersian policy profile, her own party's establishment ridiculed her as a lefty Trump. Nancy Pelosi scoffed that her win just meant voters made a choice in one district, so let's not get carried away. Ben Ritz, director of the Progressive Policy Institute, an offshoot of the old Democratic Leadership Council, groused, "Oh please, she just promised everyone a bunch of free stuff." This was before AOC decided to be the next Pelosi, instead of the next Sanders. Having shed the mantle of an outsider who shook the old guard with online savvy, she appeared in soft light for a softball interview. A literal Biden official, inside with Jen Psaki, is as close as you can get to a formal dissolution of the line between White House and media. In it, she seemed to argue for the outlaw of Fox News. "We have very real issues with what is permissible on air," she said. "Adding people like Tucker Carlson are very clearly guilty of incitement to violence, a problem in light of federal regulation in terms of what's allowed on air and what isn't." I was attracted to liberalism as a young person precisely because it didn't want to ban things. Every liberal morality play in the 70s, 80s, and 90s featured a finger-wagging moralist who couldn't stomach an obscene joke. Jerry Falwell over a Hustler parody, obscene art, Cincinnati's Contemporary Art Center over Robert Mapplethorpe's photos, objectionable music, Tipper Gore in the now seems tame record-labeling furor, or unpredictable humor, NBC in its attempt to put Richard Pryor on tape delay for Saturday Night Live. Pryor's favored writer, Paul Mooney, objected so much to all the hoops they had to jump through to be allowed on air, he ended up writing a parody job interview skit that sent SNL's ratings soaring, though ironically, it would probably never air today. Hollywood made self-congratulating feature films about nearly every one of those speech clashes. From The People vs. Larry Flynt to Dirty Pictures, starring James Woods about the Cincinnati episode, to Parental Advisory. The movie Field of Dreams features Ray Kinsella's wife Annie telling off irate mother in a school library debate about banning writer Terrence Mann, with Annie saying after, "Fascist, I'd like to ease her pain." The actual book Shoeless Joe featured J.D. Salinger, one of America's most censored authors. From To Kill a Mockingbird to Dead Man Walking, liberalism celebrated the belief that truth, tolerance, and forgiveness are the way to reach closed minds. I mentioned this before, but Rob Reiner's The American President, a naked hagiography of Clintonian politics, came to a climax with President Andrew Shepard defending his flag-burning girlfriend's honor, saying, "You want free speech? Let's see you acknowledge a man whose words make your blood boil, who's standing center stage and advocating, at the top of his lungs, that which you would spend a lifetime opposing." That scene, which sounds like it should apply to any Democrat thinking about someone like Carlson, would become ironic later. Back to AOC and Fox. Like so many other things in America, the marketplace of ideas is no longer a market. Voices with organic appeal are artificially restricted. Watching approved news these days is like watching scab baseball. You know most of the players the crowds really want to see aren't even in the dugout. By no means is this phenomenon confined to the right. As far back as the spring of 2017, when Google introduced Project Owl, a new tool designed to surface more authoritative content, outlets like the World Socialist website, Alternet, Truthdig, Democracy Now!, and Consortium News reported dramatic drops in audience. WikiLeaks traffic plummeted. That site's content is extremely difficult to access for a variety of reasons now. Years later, the Wall Street Journal reported that Google employed maintainers to tend to an anti-misinformation blacklist to prevent sites from appearing in Google News and other products. The next big event was the removal of Alex Jones from Apple, Facebook, Twitter, and Spotify. No fan of Jones, I was struck by how quickly critics moved to looking around for the next targets. Rob Reiner, the acknowledge a man whose words make your blood boil auteur, said on NBC, "You have Fox, Breitbart, Sinclair, and Alex Jones, which has now been taken off Facebook. Thank God." Senator Chris Murphy said Jones was just the tip of a giant iceberg, and companies must do more to take down one website. Apple CEO Tim Cook insisted the Jones episode was not coordinated with other firms, saying, "I've had no conversation, and to my knowledge, no one at Apple has." Later stories like the Apple-Amazon squeeze of Parler ended the ruse that the major distribution platforms were not working together to create private agreements on speech. and the hashtag Twitter files showed countless episodes of supposedly independent companies engaging in seeming anti-competitive behavior, coordinating on everything from election misinformation to pandemic messaging and holding regular industry meetings with government to discuss moderation issues. The attendees of the call below include Microsoft, Facebook, Google, Twitter, Reddit, Pinterest, Wikimedia, even Medium, gathering to hear USG list watchouts and other threats. In the 6 years since Project Owl, think about how many voices have been fully or partially removed from public view. True blue progressives won't mourn many, from Jones to Donald Trump to Carlson to RT and Sputnik to former weapons inspector Scott Ritter and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Add the de-amplification or algorithmic blacklisting of sites like Truthdig, WikiLeaks, and third-party candidates like Jill Stein, the removal under government pressure of content from people like Joe Rogan, and the seemingly endless advertiser boycotts of various other classes of bad thinker, and the field of view has been drastically narrowed. The one undeniable fact about Carlson's show is that it was materially different from other Fox content. The product was not the same as what you heard in the Hannity slot. As was the case with Donald Trump, you don't need to cheer the message, or believe it's sincere, to recognize that this differentiation exists. For instance, the Washington Post this week cited people familiar with Rupert Murdoch's thinking in saying that Carlson's ongoing eye-rolling about the war in Ukraine and use of terms like pimp to describe Volodymyr Zelensky had drawn furious blowback from powerful Republicans who see U.S. support for Ukraine as a bulwark in a fight for freedom and democracy, some of whom had Murdoch's ear. Removing Carlson from Fox makes the rest of conservative media more homogenous. The constant policing of content in blue media accomplishes the same. When the American Prospect ran a feature about Carlson that merely had a sarcastic headline, "The Smuggest Man on Air," and was only critical roughly every second or third paragraph, filling the rest of the space with detached analysis of what made Carlson's show successful, e.g. a willingness to mock ruling elites, the magazine was hit with the usual grab bag of scanner-style head exploding from a handful of reporters. This immediately caused two Prospect editors to roll over, throw their writers overboard, and replace the mildly different piece with the usual wire-to-wire blood-curdling diatribe against Carlson as a neo-fascist threat to democracy. I like and respect editor David Dayen, but a sequence like this sends a message to every writer that you'd better come at topics in a certain way if you want to be bylined. Liberals in the Bush years used to mock the metronome predictability of Fox, but the same kind of thing has been going on what used to be my side of the aisle for so long, most mainstream media products are basically identical. Everyone with a noticeably different point of view gets moved out, even if they're obvious audience assets, with Glenn Greenwald pushed out of The Intercept for wanting to publish what turned out to be the correct angle on the Hunter Biden laptop story, and Lee Fang being notable examples. It doesn't take a genius to see where this is going. To paraphrase Mencken, you don't have to think Carlson's motivations were noble to see that his rhetoric on Ukraine stood out in the current TV environment like a wart on a bald head. The rest of the corporate press, be it left or right, will now be a parade of generals and security experts whose arguments won't be about whether or not the U.S. should be involved in Ukraine, but which party is most committed and whose strategy will lead to Putin's defeat faster. We are moving back toward an era of two homogenous messaging landscapes that will intersect on national security issues, with the beaten anti-war left a fading memory and the isolationist right fired, under indictment, or banned. People like AOC can couch these moves in terms of prevention of violence all they want, but it's just too conspicuous that what's left of major commercial media also happens to be much engaged in the trumpeting of government messaging, to the point where the people reading the news are government officials. It was once considered healthy for the press to play to mass audiences and position itself as a skeptical thorn in the side of officialdom. There is no institution like that left in American life. What we have instead is an increasingly pissed-off population that needs to look about 80 results down in every Google search to find its point of view represented. Who thinks that situation is going to hold? Thanks for listening to the audio version of this article. For more, visit racket.news.